It is my distinct pleasure to introduce a doctor who, at what appears to be a very young age, is engaging in cutting edge research regarding women's health. Welcome, Dr. Nasiri.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahman. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I have so many questions to ask, but I should just share with those that are listening. Your research has to do with menstrual blood flow.
That's right.
I'm going to stop there and just give us a little background about yourself.
Yes, so my name is, as you mentioned, Sarah Nasseri. I'm actually originally, I was from Denmark, so I was born and raised in Denmark, went to medical school and came to the US about, I would say almost 10 years ago now. Worked at Stanford OB/GYN for a couple of years and then started this journey that we're on with Quinn. Um, when I was in medical school, I was always very passionate about preventative care. I had sort of seen in practice, but also, of course, knew in theory how important time is when it comes to any condition. And yet, very little time was actually spent on early detection, early diagnostics, and prevention. So that was something that was kind of always on my mind, that mismatch there is between how we truly keep our health and in terms of being healthy rather than this sort of waiting for us to get sick and then trying to fix that.
Yes.
Um, and so, I was it was sort of occupying my brain at the time, how we could become more preventative. And frankly, really the question was, how do we even get information about what's going on in our bodies outside the doctor's office before we have symptoms, ideally? And there was this movement or explosion in medical devices, if you will, where, there were, projects and companies trying to do exactly that, to give us information about what's going on outside the doctor's office, tracking our steps and our pulse and our sleep and these sorts of things. But not always was the information very clinically relevant. And that was something that was very important to me. How do we get information what's going on in our bodies and how do we make sure that it's clinically relevant?
Hmm.
And therefore, blood being the most commonly used bodily fluid was top of mind. And then the question became, well, how do we get access to blood regularly, non-invasively, conveniently? And that's sort of when it hit me that, hold on a minute, half of the world bleeds every month. Why has nobody looked at that? Um, and that sort of became the start of a very long journey in understanding the diagnostic utility and sadly also understanding just how far we are behind when it comes to women's health in general and how much work there actually is in front of us to accelerate our understanding and knowledge of women's specific conditions to really be able to deliver care, let alone preventative care, to half of the world, you know? So
So
that's a little bit about kind of
that's
how
very
we started and how I
interesting.
got
So if I'm hearing you
started.
correctly, you trained as an OB/GYN, correct?
Actually, no. So I graduated medical school. And I would say I was, my direction was probably going to be women's health, but
Yes.
the idea for Queen actually came while I was in medical school. And
Really?
so this project kind of, took over and became my main priority after I graduated. And so I never went in and kind of specialized in OBGYN in specifics, no.
So interesting. So you graduated from medical school, but by the time you graduated, you had already decided that this was a project you wanted to pursue.
That's correct.
And the project was looking at menstrual blood flow. Because you're correct, when a person thinks about getting labs drawn, you automatically think it's a blood draw, that you have to go to the lab or you have to go someplace to have your blood drawn in order for it to be analyzed.
Yes.
And your eureka moment was basically saying women bleed once a month. Why can't we use menstrual blood flow?
That's right. That's right.
So the first response is yuck.
Yes. That I recall some responses being exactly that. And it's funny to me that, we have this notion of menstrual blood being a little bit yuck or waste product or dirty, or even in some cases, there's a lot of theories, I would say perceptions surrounding menstrual blood, stigmas actually,
Yes,
that
yes,
that somehow surrounds menstrual blood. And I will say it's odd to me, from a medical perspective, we have investigated nearly every bodily fluid in, human biology. We've looked at blood, of course, we've looked at feces, we've looked at urine, we've looked at sweat, we've looked at tears, yet menstrual blood had not been looked at. And
interesting.
I think that the very reaction that you sort of come up with here is probably partly why, right? Menstrual blood has just been overlooked and disregarded as anything that could possibly have value.
You're right. You're absolutely right about that. So I'm assuming at this point you've done a lot of research into the menstrual blood flow. Can you tell us what all is in the menstrual blood flow?
Yeah, so we know, so menstrual blood is a very complex bodily fluid, actually. You have access to systemic blood because basically what happens during a woman's period is that the endometrium, which has all these capillaries, those capillaries, they break. And that's when you start bleeding. So you have blood that comes, from these capillaries. But then with that, you also have endometrial tissue that comes out with the blood, and then you also have vaginal fluid. So you really have these three distinct um, compartments of biological material that are all in, a menstrual blood sample, which makes it a very interesting bodily fluid to research. And I think, we are really only starting to understand the diagnostic utility. From my perspective, there's absolutely no question or doubt in my mind that there is utility here and
Mhm.
there is value from a medical perspective in how this could be useful for women, useful in making healthcare more accessible in particular. But the full understanding of, the specific indications that I believe this has potential to actually impact is still, we're super early, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So it's an exciting moment in time. We have data to support the value and that the utility is there, but there's still lots more to dive into.
For young budding scientists who may be listening to you, how do you go from, this is a good question. Why don't we use menstrual blood flow as a diagnostic tool?
Yeah.
So what did you do? I mean, you had this unusual
Yeah.
idea,
Yeah,
and what was the next step?
it's a good question. Why do we sometimes get so wrapped up in an idea that makes that idea become something that you can't let go of? And I do think that's in parts how I felt at the time. I had I was actually in Denmark. I distinctly remember I had been in the US and I had participated in this graduate studies program over here, actually at NASA Ames, not too far from the Bay Area where we are located and where we have our offices. And I had gone back to Denmark, and I believe I was there for about a week before I packed my bags and I was on the train back to the airport to come back. And it was really this very moment of, at the time, of course, I didn't know that there was diagnostic utility. When we looked at the literature and what had been published, I mean, there was barely anything published on,
Right.
very little information. So,
Okay.
at the time, it was very much for me, it was a it was, we just have to research it to understand, because the opportunity in my mind was so big in terms of how this could be potentially a game changer when it comes to women's health and accessibility. Many places in the world, not in, I would say even within the US, there are many rural areas where it's very hard for women to get care access. It's inconvenient, and there are barriers that prevent women to get information about what's going on in their bodies and get care when they need to get care. Whether it's distance from an OBGYN, whether it's financially, the cost surrounding that, or it's just practically you are, as a woman, a big part of the workforce, you're a big part of family life. It isn't, a barrier in many ways. And so in my mind, the idea that I don't have to go in and ask permission to get my iron level or whatever it may be. As a woman, you have the power to get that information because you happen to bleed naturally every single month. And
Mhm.
so I really, really couldn't let go of at least trying to understand if there was value here potentially for patients. And that kind of just took over a little bit. And, you kind of, once you take the first step and it leads to the next. And for me, that was, the very first step was the literature review. What do we know about it? And realizing that we knew so little, the next step was to figure out, okay, well, how can we build on top the very little that we know? And I
Yes.
happened to get in contact with the the head of OB-GYN at Stanford University Hospital, family planning division, who became a close collaborator, and I would say today even consider this person a friend and a mentor, and we've worked very hard on laying the foundation of our understanding when it comes to the diagnostic utility. And I think that was a good place for me also to start some of this research and sort of take it the first couple of steps to get to where we are today.
So this is fascinating. This is a fascinating process because I'm hearing you say that there was a question and you followed that up by doing a literature search and saw that there were very few answers.
Yeah,
But the question persisted in your mind, and you then broached the subject with someone within the Department of OBGYN.
correct.
Their initial response to you was receptive because you started off by saying there's very little research being done regarding women's health. And so here you come with something that seems a little different, is a good
Yes.
word.
Yeah.
The response that you got was welcoming, I take it.
I think I had reached out to a number of people, and I would say the responses were slightly different. I remember being surprised by the hesitancy to even investigate something like menstrual blood. There was definitely that yuck factor for some, and there was the stigma that made the conversation not as long as I would have liked.
Yes.
But for this particular clinician, I, this was just a clinician that kind of understood from the very first conversation I had with him what this could mean for women's health. And I remember him saying, "Look, I've been an OBGYN for 40 plus years. I cannot believe that I had never thought of this." Like the very first question we ask any patient, really, when they come in and it's an OB-GYN consult is, when was your last period? Yet,
Absolutely.
I think he was of the opinion that it is kind of odd that we haven't thought about, well, what is menstrual blood and how can it potentially be helpful? We're putting needles in women's arms while they're bleeding. Why haven't we thought about using the blood that comes naturally? And so I think he just understood it. And I think that's kind of where, as you embark on these kinds of projects, almost perhaps regardless of what the topic is and what company it is or what project it is, it really oftentimes comes down to the people that you meet, right? And I think this was just an example of meeting the right person that had the right, background to collaborate with in some of these early studies.
Fascinating. You make the connection, someone has a similar interest, and now what's the next step?
The next step is that I then moved from my home country to the US. I started working at the Stanford OB-GYN. And the purpose was really to start the very first study looking at clinically relevant biomarkers in menstrual blood.
Mhm.
Got the IRB approval, which is of course an important step in conducting clinical research. And then we started recruiting patients and collecting. At the time, what we were looking at was collecting menstrual blood at the same time as we would do a venous blood draw.
Mm-hmm.
And we would take both samples and we would process them in the same way in a clinical laboratory. And we would look at how different biomarkers correlate. So very interesting study, and we published this data, of course. We actually at Quinn we publish all of our data. It's a very important aspect of why we're building Quinn. It's to really help enhance this field as a whole, and part of that is that we share our results with the medical community and the public. It's a I think an important part of, frankly, being a medical company in some ways, that this data is to be shared and to enhance our understanding of women's biology, right? So yeah, we published that, and once we understood that there certainly
And the
was that,
preliminary results, what did the results show?
it showed that there was a very strong correlation between these specific clinically relevant biomarkers, and that they were certainly we were able to monitor them using a menstrual blood sample, which was very exciting, for one, because it kind of confirmed our hypotheses, but also once we had understood that there was diagnostic utility, the next question was really, well, how do we then collect that in a way that is consistent, convenient, and
Yes.
that enables us to
Yes.
have stability with the results, that the kind of stability that we need, right?
Did
And
you
so that
find,
then became the next part of my journey. It was to build what then eventually became the QPAD.
yes, and we're going to get there. Interesting. Did you find that the numbers, the levels were identical, or there was just a correlation, meaning that if you monitor the numbers, when one went up, the other went up? What type of results did you see?
So it's very rare that even if I was to do a blood draw on you today and I submitted that and got that analyzed, and I then did another blood draw to you at the very same time or right after, generally speaking, it's rare that we will get the exact same results. And that's just how clinical chemistry works, that we
Mhm.
are always looking at correlation, and it's
Mhm.
never going to be 100%. But what we are looking for is whether the correlation is within what we call acceptable variability. And so there are standards for all clinical laboratories for what that variability, what that acceptable variability is. And it differs actually depending on what you're looking at, what specific biomarker you are looking at, then that acceptable variability will be different. And so what we were looking at was to make sure that the acceptable variability in general was the same that we were seeing in menstrual blood. And that is what we confirmed with that first study.
So my question is this. Does it make a difference the source of the blood? Meaning that if we're monitoring a certain biomarker, is it important to identify the source was a venipuncture versus the source was a menstrual flow, or is that not relevant?
For the biomarkers that we have looked at, for our studies, of course, it was relevant. To understand what menstrual blood and how it correlates, we were collecting that data, and that data was important. But once the biomarkers are fully validated, so for example, we recently obtained our FDA clearance, which is very exciting for hemoglobin A1C. And part of obtaining that FDA clearance is to show that this is basically as good as getting a blood draw. This can, you know,
That's
this
what
can
the question was. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So that's what we're showing here, is that a woman, instead of having to go, book an appointment, go down to the lab, wait, sit in line, get the blood draw, and then get the results later, a woman who, can literally go about her normal life and collect using the QPAD and get her hemoglobin A1C results through that, instead of having to do that procedure. So that's exactly what this FDA clearance is granting us the sort of, get go to do.
Fast forward, it's such a great idea that you start a company, and
Yes,
this company is named Quinn,
that's correct.
which is Danish for woman, meaning
Yes, so the Danish word kvinde means woman, and Quinn is sort of a variation of that word, because both myself and my co-founder, we're both from Denmark. So that's how this name came about.
so another question. Was there a reason you chose to do this work in the United States versus doing the work in Denmark?
That's a great question. The idea for Quinn, I actually had while I was in the US. So I was doing this graduate studies program, and I had the idea, and I already sort of had initiated filing patents, and I would say the project almost started in this part of the world, and the momentum sort of was here, and so I don't even remember thinking too much about kind of one way or the other, but because the project started here and there was momentum and we had, connections over here as part of kind of starting this. Um, and I would say a big part of it was also that you had an institution like Stanford University Hospital, you know, inviting me over to do the research.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that was, an open door to getting at least the very speed at which we could do research, the funding opportunities to some extent, and the willingness to even start investigating this area of women's health. I found that that was present in at least this particular part
Yes.
of the US, which kind of like different pieces, you know,
This came
came
together.
together to make that the realistic or the most sort of the next part of the journey. I think Denmark has incredible research opportunities as well, and there are sort of certainly a world in which we could have done it in Denmark, but given the existing conversations we already had, and
Yes.
the US being the type of market that it is, it just made sense to kind of continue where we left off
Okay.
um,
Great.
when the idea came.
Fascinating. So your research is showing that there is some utility that can be obtained by using menstrual blood flow. And
Yes,
form a company which is pretty much dedicated to identifying those biomarkers or tests that can be used using menstrual blood flow.
that's right.
And you started with hemoglobin A1C, is that correct?
That's correct.
Why?
When we think about people living with diabetes, it is a condition that unfortunately is growing and even considered almost a pandemic. So it is a big public health concern, and it's also a condition that we know we can actually prevent a lot of comorbidities if we monitor regularly and we're able to lower that A1C. And so I think the sort of from a medical standpoint, there certainly is a impact to be had. It's also a group of people that have a need for regular blood draws. And so, when we talk to women with diabetes and them having to go in and get a blood draw every third month. And it's sort of this reminder of this disease or condition that they're living with. And the ability to be able to give them their time back. And, when we ask women, what were you doing while you were getting, your A1C tested? And they report back, well, I was at work, or, I was picking up my kids or doing groceries. And that confirms kind of what we're hoping to do with this platform, with this opportunity that women really have had since the beginning of time, that giving women the ability to get information about their bodies in this very convenient way. And hemoglobin A1C is a starting point because it is something that women living with diabetes have to get regularly. It's a chronic condition. It's a pandemic that is growing. And it is a condition where we can actually have an impact by monitoring and lowering that A1C. That's part of the reason why this became an important group of people for us that we hope to help almost demedicalize their day to day as much as we can.
Let's get into the practicality of this. How exactly does a woman do this test?
So when you order the Q-pad, which right now can be ordered on Quinn.com, our website, or on Amazon, you receive a kit via mail. It comes to your home. When you receive the kit and you open it, you'll find that there's two Q-pads inside of the kit. When you open the Q-pad, one of them it really it looks and it feels and it's used like any other menstrual pad. It's built on organic cotton. So in that way, it's there's no chemicals added or anything like that. It's a very clean material that we've decided to use for this purpose. And then, women use it like they would any other menstrual pad. I would say on average, women use it for 2 to 4 hours. Some women sleep with it overnight, so it's a little bit different, and depending on when a woman may have a period, which is, to some extent a little bit unpredictable. But then, once a woman has worn the Cupid, on the front of the Cupid, there's a little printed oval, and that tells a woman when she has collected enough for us to run analysis on it. Once she's done, she can pull this little tab, and when she pulls that tab, it actually removes a small collection device. She'll throw away the pad like you would with any other pad, but that small collection device is put in a pre-stamped shipping container that comes with the kit, and she puts the sample in there and then she mails it, and we receive it in a clinical laboratory. We run the analysis, and then you actually get the results back on a mobile app that shows you not only what your level is today, but also how it's changing over time, along with recommendations for kind of next steps. You can also, in the app, click a button, share with your physician, and very easily that will pump out a clinical laboratory report that any doctor is very used to reading. So I'd say a very boring format compared to what the app will show you, which is definitely more user friendly and visual.
Mhm.
But if you do wish to share with your physician, then that laboratory report is, would substitute what you would get at LabCorp or something else when you get a venous blood draw, and that can be shared with the doctor. So that's kind of the concept of the platform.
And what's the turnaround time from I'm mailing this, correct? I'm mailing
That's
this
correct.
to the lab or to your lab, to your company.
That's right.
And what's the turnaround for the lab result to come back?
On average, about a week for us to, once you've shipped then it's 3 to 5 days is kind of the typical shipping time, and then reanalyze it, when we receive it. So about a week is the typical average.
Is there anything that a woman shouldn't be doing or cannot do while wearing this pad or having this pad or while she's on her menstrual cycle?
Yeah, no, so one part of what we went through in obtaining FDA clearance was really to look at almost anything you can imagine a woman may or may not do during while she's using, the Q-pad. So we've tested more than, 50 different interference, so soap and, douche and all kinds of, things that could potentially be in that area. And part of us obtaining clearance was to show that that does not affect the performance or the results and the consistency of those. So, of course, with the Cupid, there are instructions, but there are really no sort of things that you can't do necessarily. Some women are very active. They are going for a run. Some women are less active and, not doing that. So, and we have not seen and that impacts the result in any way. So as long as you follow the instructions that come with the kit, and they are also in the app, then there's really very few limitations to what you could be doing while you are getting tested.
And if I'm understanding you, there's very little manipulation. So it's not as though she has to truly interact with her menstrual flow. It,
No, not at all. Not
it's
at all.
rather simple procedure of just removing the tab.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, it's very simple. I think once you have the keypad in front of you, actually one of the pieces of feedback we got in, we've done a lot of, I mean, we've tested more than 1,000 women at this point. And so also part of FDA clearance was do what we call usability studies, where we really, give women a kit and we really don't tell them anything, and they are just kind of following the instructions, and we are monitoring whether they are able to do so. And I would say one of the pieces of feedback we got from a lot of women was like, you don't need to explain to me how to use a menstrual pad. Like this is, women, I would say it's a very simple and intuitive collection method, which is why we were able to obtain at-home clearance, right? There's not a lot of medical devices that has FDA clearance for at home. A lot of the time, you have to go into the clinic, even if you're, submitting a urine sample, actually you're doing it inside of the clinic, and very few, devices have actually obtained that at home clearance. And I think one of the reasons why we were able to do so is because it's so simple. And in fact, we've heard women describe this, and one of the reasons women are excited about this is because they call it passive collection. I don't have to do
Yes.
anything. I don't have to prick my finger, wash my hand, the needle has to go this way or swap. And am I doing that right? Here you don't have to do anything. You're wearing a menstrual pad. Your body does everything else for you, almost whether you want it or not, right? So
Yeah.
it's really just about, are you taking advantage of this wonderful piece of biology that we have as women, and getting information about what's going on in your body, because your body's doing it regardless, right?
Yeah. I could see how women would like it. It's a true time saver without any loss of clinical efficacy.
Yeah,
And the results are your preliminary results are showing that the results that you get from the menstrual blood flow, looking at their hemoglobin A1C, is equivalent to what you would see if they had gone and had blood drawn from a
that's correct.
mom.
That's correct. And I would say, I mean, this is in
Wow.
particular what the FDA clearance was about. And I would say we've also looked at other biomarkers. When you think about women's health, of course, many aspects that are super relevant to stay on top of. And we've looked at those as well. And we are also seeing, super high correlation and equivalency. And we're excited to kind of bring the full potential of menstrual blood to women. But in terms of hemoglobin A1C, this is the, FDA cleared and is on the market, and providing value for women even today.
On the market, meaning someone could go online to your website and this
Absolutely.
product.
Yep, you can order it on quinn.com and also Amazon.
Wow.
And you can start using it, start to track your A1C. For women with diabetes in particular, we often hear that it's either because they have a goal of lowering their A1C, and so they want insight regularly to see whether the lifestyle changes they are implementing are actually working. For some women, it's because they actually find a lot of comfort in knowing their A1C before they go to the doctor's office, so that it's
Because
almost not a surprise.
the result comes to them first, and then they share
Correct.
with their provider.
They share if they choose to do so. Exactly.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I'm two kind of correlated questions. What has been the acceptance rate from physicians? Because I could imagine doctors saying, "Yeah, sure, but I still want you to go to X lab to get your blood drawn."
I think that's part of the reason why we chose to go through if the FDA is because it really gives us that clinical stamp of approval in terms of that equivalency, that it is a substitute for that blood draw. And I think in this moment in time, it's still we are the first diagnostic menstrual pad to ever get FDA clearance. So it's a
It's
new
a whole
approach,
new
right?
category.
It's a
Yes.
whole new category, and it will take time
Yes.
for the awareness that this even exists for that to happen, right? But we are building this very much for women and for the patient, and I think one of the powerful full tools that, this brings, and, menstrual blood really brings to women's health, is that it is really an opportunity for women to be empowered and
Yes.
take their healthcare in their own hands. They don't have to ask for permission. And
Yes.
so we're sort of starting with that angle. And I think as more assays get obtain FDA clearance on this particular opportunity, we'll see this be a bigger and bigger part of clinical practice, but that takes time, right? So it's still early days in terms of,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Can you give us an idea of what other type of tests are still being evaluated but are showing the potential to be as good as the results that you've gotten with the hemoglobin A1C?
So yeah, we've in a clinical laboratory, we've validated a number of other assays, and it's I'll give you some examples like thyroid hormone, fertility hormones, that are relevant both in terms of women that are looking to potentially start a family, but also for women who are approaching menopause and are in that perimenopause phase and experiencing symptoms and wanting to understand where that comes from and what they can do about it. So some of those hormones we've validated. We've validated hemoglobin, we've validated inflammation biomarkers. But I would say the one that I am very excited about and where I think we could really have an incredible impact is in the detection of cervical cancer. We've done a study that was actually funded by the Cancer Institute at Stanford, that shows that, when we compare a clinician collected cervical specimen, which is also known, I would say commonly known as a pap smear, that procedure, when we compare that to a woman collecting a sample on the QPAD, and we analyze both of those samples, we're seeing very, very high ability for the QPAD to detect cervical cancer is similar to what you would get at a clinician's office. So that's an indication we're really excited about. And the impact of that, of course, today women are, dying because of cervical cancer. And it's a cancer that frankly can be entirely prevented if we screen for it early. And
Absolutely. Are you collecting cervical cells or are you looking for the human papillomavirus?
so yeah, we look for the high risk HPV, the strains that causes the cancer, which is what we also look for now in when we do a pap smear. Oftentimes we are looking for that virus, and sort of moving away from looking at cells. That's almost an older paradigm, of how we do screening for cervical cancer. And so we are looking for the very same high risk range that, your clinician would look for. We're just doing it at the comfort of your home using the QPAD rather than coming in, getting undressed, getting the speculum examination, collecting a sample from the cervix and running the sample. So, lots of barriers that currently inhibit women from getting that screening done could be avoided by solutions like the QPAD. And I think for this particular indication, at a global level, eh,
Yes.
we are talking, potentially saving lives here. It's a very big opportunity that, I think we as a team are working really hard to realize, but also we're very excited about the potential of.
Have you found that there's any test or biomarker that you cannot perform on menstrual blood flow?
Absolutely. And so we actually do put a lot of effort in publishing our data, and that is not just the data that works out, but also the data that doesn't work out. So
Yes.
it's very interesting. One of the papers we've published, we are finding that for something like glucose, not hemoglobin A1C, but glucose on its own, that it turns out that the level of glucose in menstrual blood is just significantly lower than it is in your systemic blood. And I would say that is an example of a biomarker that we are not going to be monitoring on the QPAD. And also, a biomarker that you could say doesn't really make sense to monitor in that way. Um, the use case for glucose on a monthly basis is not clear here. But yeah, that's one example of a biomarker that definitely is not correlated.
Have you done any testing on sexually transmitted infections? Yeah,
So
I'm thinking chlamydia,
yeah, I
gonorrhea.
think those are all examples of indications that super important, of course, for women's health. And we have some early data that suggests that chlamydia, gonorrhea, these types of STDs can be detected, similarly to how we're seeing high risk HPV is so accurate on the QPAD. You're collecting from that area, and we are actually in the middle of investigating further on chlamydia and gonorrhea and seeing how we can validate those on the QPAD platform, but strongly believe and at this point in time, we feel confident that it will be possible to do.
Wow, just wow. So, for a woman that's listening to this podcast, what can you tell her? What kind of message do you want to leave her with?
I think, in part, I really hope that women will use the QPAD first and foremost to understand what's going on in the body, the importance of knowing what is going up and down in our health, right? So using the QPAD, monitoring that, starting with hemoglobin A1C, getting that information and staying on top of one's health, the importance of that, definitely want to, make sure that the message of that comes across. But then on the other hand, I'm hoping that women will use the QPAD because this is really an opportunity for us collectively to enhance women's health. We know that women, I mean, women's health has been overlooked, and there is a gap in the data we even have on women's biology, right? Let alone, women of color or my specific minorities. And so, I guess one message I would love to communicate is the importance of participating and being represented in the data.
So they're ongoing studies, and if someone wanted to be in your study, how would they go about doing that?
I would say very regularly launching new studies, and you can read about them on our website or in our app, and encourage women to participate. Also, when you use the QPAD, if you wish to participate in research, there is on the app you can consent to research. And then if you choose to do so, and I would say actually majority of women are consenting, which is exciting.
Nice.
Um, if you choose to do so, we can biobank your sample and then use it to over time look for progression markers and pool that data to gain a better understanding of women's specific conditions that we really don't have a lot of data on. So currently, it's really about when once you use the QPAD, if you choose to consent, then that's how you would contribute to the research. And then on our website, when we launch new research projects, that's another way to participate. Currently, we don't have active studies, but we will be in the new year. We'll be launching new studies, and I think just the importance of if we don't participate and we're not represented in the data, the conclusions that we make on diagnostics, and unfortunately, that has already been made on different diagnostics, will not, take into account this population group. So we have to participate and be represented.
And what is the cost to a woman that might want to get a QPAD?
So if you go on Amazon.com or on our website, what we are doing with this test is we are actually matching the average copay. So what you would pay if you were to go down to a clinical laboratory, that copay we are matching with the QPAD, and that average is about $29.
And for one QPAD?
That's so with the kit comes two QPADs, but it's for one test. So you would get your hemoglobin A1C report along with those recommendations in one sort of test, if
Gotcha.
that makes sense.
This was really eye-opening. It's something that was so obvious in front of us the whole time, and no one took the time to even question, is there any benefit, anything that we can learn from menstrual blood flow? And you asked the question. So that's truly admirable. And not only did you ask the question, you pursued the answer. So thank you for the work that you did. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And if you could just leave us with your website on our parting.
Website, just to leave you with that, is
Oh,
www.qvin.com. That's where you can get the QPAD, or you can go on Amazon and order it directly there as well. So
all
yeah,
right.
hope you'll have a good, we're excited for the support we're getting from women and also hearing what the experience is. Always looking
Yes,
for
please
feedback.
stay in touch. Stay in touch. I'm interested to see what else you discover along the way. Thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye bye.